on politics, demographics, and inequality. His first question is, what will happen if the political tables are turned and the Republican Party wins the White House in 2024 and the House and the Senate along the way? In other words, they make a full sweep of our government. One thing that you need to know is that Donald Trump is an Orban, Orban worshiper. And what is that? That's Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, who's in the aggressive pursuit of a right-wing political populist agenda. On January 3rd, when Trump was asked about the re-election of Mr. Orban as prime minister, Trump declared, and I quote, "He is a strong leader and respected by all. He has my complete support and endorsement for re-election as prime minister," unquote. Now, should that surprise anybody after observing Mr. Trump's behavior in the past 3 months? We're already halfway through March, and April's 2 weeks away. So think about that, number one. And what is it about Hungary that Mr. Orban appeals so powerfully to Trump? Zach Beauchamp of Vox wrote on September 13th, 2018, and I quote, "A political system that aims to stamp out dissent and seize control of every major aspect of the economy, the political and social life without needing to resort to hard measure, like banning elections and building up a police state." One of the most disconcerting parts of observing Hungarian soft fascism up close is that it's easy to imagine the model being exported. While the Orban regime grew out of Hungary's unique history and political culture, it is also a playbook for subtle repression, in theory, be run in any democratic country whose leaders have had enough of the political opposition. Does this remind you of somebody? Yes, well, it reminds you of President Biden too, but more so, think about what Donald Trump previously said. "If I'm not elected president, there will be bloodshed." People who were around the Cold War, 50s, 60s, early 70s, do we remember an incident in the United Nations when Khrushchev banged on the desk with his shoe, emphasizing his support, the Soviet Union support for Cuba, known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, when JFK was in office? Thought. And how the American right fell in love with Hungary. In the New York Times Magazine, Elizabeth Tavarsky quoted Rod Dreher, the combative conservative blogger, on Orban's immigration policies. "Building a fence on the border to keep Muslims out, for example." Does that sound familiar during the former President Trump's presidency? If you could wind back the clock 50 years and show the French, the Belgian, and the German people what mass immigration from the Muslim world would do to their countries by 2021, they never, ever would have accepted it, he remarked. Is that true? What about the United States? Should we have done a more aggressive policy when all the immigrants from overseas came with their skills and expertise and experience to this country? The Irish, the English, Germans, Scandinavian, Indians, Vietnamese. Where were they when they prevented the United States accepting all those Chinese workers to work as slaves for the railroad? Where were they when all the African Americans were brought over from Africa and forced and bought to work as slaves in the cotton fields of the South? I seem to recall that the United States did not say no to any of that. In fact, they were very eager to dip their hands into the till. But then you have to remember, most of our immigrants came from Western Europe and eventually from Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. Nixon's view says that both opportunists have figured out the political usefulness of reactionary populism, and Trump will push the United States in a broadly similar direction towards non-hegemonial governance. During his first term, Trump treated the presidency as his own personal property. Well, we already know what happened and what action he took. He accused everybody of lying, stealing, planting false information, making up stories. He bribed people, blackmailed people. He got officials to do his bidding, just as he would if he was a king, an emperor, a dictator. Makes you wonder. We already got a taste of how he does his governing of the United States. Something that was his to use to punish enemies, reward loyalists, and enhance his family's wealth. If he wins in 2024, we're likely to see this on steroids, and he's already promised. Although Nixon's view is that Trump will be unable to match Orban, for example, installing a crony as president of Harvard or forcing Yale to decamp for Canada. But, Nixon says, it's pretty clear that he'll be better installing absolute loyalists as the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense. So if Trump succeeds, we'll be able to find a lot of similar parts, but it won't be the same model. I suspect it will be worse. The U.S. is a large federation with a lot of capacity for private violence, a major international footprint, and a multi-trillion-dollar economy. Hungary is a very minor player in a confederation dominated by democratic regimes. Cooley stressed in an email the, quote, active networking among right-wing political associations and groups with Orban, and he cited the January 24th Orban's re-election by the New York Young Republican Club, who said, today, both the United States of America and countries in Europe, like Hungary, face an existential crisis. The ruling elite and political establishment failed leadership and ideology have eroded the meaning and purpose of citizenship. For those against this ideology and for the preservation of Western civilization for all countries in the West, it is imperative that we stand in support of one another as national communities. Well, we've been divided for a very long time. First with the war in Vietnam, then with the war in Afghanistan, then with the war in Iraq, and so it goes. When you have a former president put down and stare down a former senator who fought in the war and was told he was a traitor and a coward after he's held in captivity for several years, you have to wonder why he's turning on his own kind. What's in it for him? Why is he doing that? And if he's throwing that senator under the bus, who else is he willing to sacrifice for his own needs and greed? Orban's appeal to the right flank of the Republican Party, in Cooley's view, lies in an ideology which rests on redefining the meaning of the West away from liberal principles and toward ethno-national ideals and conservative values. And his strategy for considering power is to close or take over media, stack the courts, divide and stigmatize the opposition, reject commitments to constraining liberal ideas and institution, and publicly target the most vulnerable groups. These ideological conservatives are reinforced by material interests as the main target groups of social investment policies, i.e., the new middle class, including women and the young with high levels of education, are distanced from the typical radical right voter who displays lower levels of formal education. Would you like to hear some of the similarities between Trumpism and European populism? Bosselmeyer described it this way. In Europe, the welfare state and social policy more generally are much ingrained in people's minds. This means that in the US, Trumpism goes along with criticism about the welfare state in general. See, the attempts of Trump trying to get rid of Obamacare brings to mind. Whereas in Europe, it really is more about welfare chauvinism, protecting the good old welfare state for deserving people, namely hard-working natives. In addition, Bosselmeyer wrote, there is strong corporal tats element in the Trump movement. Those are your business elitists. Whereas in European right-wing populism, that's typically not the case. The right-wing populist movement on both continents, Bosselmeyer went on to say, are similar in the rejection of a liberal attitude toward globalization, both regarding the economic side as well as the identity part of globalization. Also, they both subscribe to a traditional role model in the family and traditional general rules, which means that if you're not normal in their eyes, you are to die. I mean, that's what Hitler was about the concentration camps. Germany's white, pure Viking blood, as opposed to the dirty Jews and the blacks and the gypsies who were not pure. That's what he means, folks. So I would go over the terminology that Hitler used during World War II to describe what his ideal state of purism means, or perhaps go over the KKK's rules of what they considered to be a 100% American and how that defines a whole generation. Cécile Adai, a professor at Stanford who studies French politics and the far right, wrote in an email, if in 2024 Trump or Ron DeSantis wins the presidency and Republicans control both the Senate and the House, the general agenda would be a backlash against any anti-discrimination against inclusive policies implemented by the Biden administration for an attempt to shift further the Supreme Court pendulum toward an anti-abortion, for originalists, constitutionalists, for implementing voter suppression policies, and for federal funding limitation on some forms of speech, critical race theory, the teaching or research of segregation, anti-Semitism or racism in the states, as well as a return to extremely restrictive anti-immigration policy, rebuilding the wall, for curbing down further visas and green cards, and for increasing deportations. On September 9th, a U.S. District Judge Mark Walker issued a 90-page opinion declaring that the law's vagueness permits those in power to weaponize its enforcement against any group who wishes to express any message that the government approves of, and that the lawless actions of a few rogue individuals could effectively criminalize the protected speech of hundreds, if not thousands, of law-abiding people living in Florida. On December 15th, DeSantis proposed the Stop the Wrongs to Our Kids and Employers, WOKE, Act, which would give parents the right to sue school systems if they believe their children are being taught critical race theory, with a provision granting parents the right to collect attorney fees if they win. The enactment of laws encouraging citizens to become private enforcers of anti-liberal policies has become increasingly popular in Republican-controlled states. I guess it's buying the vote, huh? Glenn Youngkin, the newly elected governor of Virginia, created a tip line that parents can use to report teachers whose classes cover inherently divisive concepts, including crucial race theory. Youngkin told an interviewer this: "We have set up a particular email address called help@education@governor.virginia.gov for parents to send us any instances where they feel that their fundamental rights are being violated, where their children are not being respected, where they are inherently divisive practices in their schools. We're asking for input right from parents to make sure we can go right to the source as we continue to work to make sure that Virginia's education system is on the path to reestablish excellence." Is that like, well, turning in your parents to the Gestapo because they didn't salute Hitler? Is that like turning in your parents if they do something that a child does not like, and therefore they have the right to turn state's evidence against the parents? And how would they handle it if something else happens? What will they do? Teachers are being armed with guns and being taught how to use them to protect their kids from people who come out from the outside world or other students and shoot. Do teachers have the right then to use these weapons, or do they need to receive written permission from their students? The Washington Post's Greg Sargent wrote, "We're seeking dozens of GOP proposals to bar whole concepts from classrooms outright." The Republican governor of Virginia has debuted a mechanism for parents to rat out teachers, bills threatening punishment of them proliferating. Book banning efforts are outpacing anything in recent memory. Hitler did that. He burned all the books, especially all the books by the Jews, and probably all the Christians who became Jews, or Jews who became Christians. He didn't recognize them either. Or if you were Jewish and you're married outside your faith, you all died. Is that what we really want, people? To turn the United States into an imitation? Are we talking about the Lords of Rings? The Lord of the Rings? Where Saruman and Sauron intimidated and blackmailed people in order to get their way? And if they didn't get their way, it was all right for them to send out the trolls and orcs to destroy those villages and cities and oppress those people who gave them a hard time. Think of the original ending of the trilogy. What happened? Saruman went to the Shire and turned it upside down and made it his own little kingdom. until until Frodo and his friends came back, but the damage was done. Are we going to have a happy ending to planet Earth? And with the US elections in 2024? That's the first part of this episode on Lest We Forget One Man's Opinion. Actually, it's more than one man. Everybody jumps into the fray. Everybody has their own opinion, political, personal, and they all want you to hear what they have to say. And your job as a citizen is to filter out the noise, filter out the propaganda, filter out the hate. Remember that gentleman from the KKK who wanted to run for president? So somebody shot him and put him in a wheelchair? Yes. Well, those days are not over. And who are the KKK? Those are the defeated soldiers from the South who decided they had had enough and they weren't going to take it anymore. So it gave them license to kill people who they saw as a threat. You're always going to see threats in the world. There are always people who want to be in charge, in power, who want to take over, who are narcissists. And if you don't do what they want, then they kill you, or imprison you, or enslave you, or get rid of you. Think about that. Thank you very much for listening to Lest We Forget Historical with your host, Lillian Cauldwell. You can find us at Passionate World Talk Radio Network.com and read the blog. You can also find us on youtube.com/PWR Network _PW Talk Radio. Also on Twitter, on Facebook.com/Passionate World Radio, and about 15 to 25 directories. Also on April 23rd, author Vicky Esther Chang, who wrote the book, The Gold Nuggets, Digital Strategies for a Digital World, with co-host Lillian S. Cauldwell. A workbook comes with the book. Go over to Amazon and check out the book, buy it. Look up Vicky Esther, VIKIESTHEER, Chang, CHANG, and buy the book. Gold Nuggets, podcasting, it's way beyond the microphone. And if you're looking for an opportunity to become a host on an internet talk radio station that takes up the first 25 pages of Google, text us at 484-364-1032, your name, your email, and the first 3 recordings of either an oral presentation or episodes of your podcast. Or send it to our email, pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. And next week, we will continue one man's opinion of former President Trump. Thank you all very much for listening. And remember, please keep listening. Thank you.